Hello and welcome to the Credible Life broadcast. Kicking back off in the new year. We're excited to be here today and kicking off with arguably a very scintillating topic. So excited to have a fantastic super lawyer, is what Brian explains to me he is called, Aaron Pelley here with us today. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of Aaron's background, and then we'll do some intros and we'll dive in. Very excited. Aaron Pelley is a distinguished attorney and founding partner at Cultiva Law, renowned for his expertise in emerging markets and highly regulated industries. He has over 17 years of legal experience and is a leading authority in navigating complex regulatory landscapes. He offers strategic guidance in areas such as regulatory compliance, corporate governance, litigation, and intellectual property. Aaron has successfully represented clients in high-stakes cases, influencing key legal precedents and industry frameworks, which is very exciting. And beyond his practice, he is also a passionate advocate for policy reform. So he frequently speaks at industry events. He contributes to legal education. He is an innovator, and he has a client-centered approach to his practice that makes him a trailblazer in shaping the future of legal standards for evolving industries like the ones we serve as well. So welcome, Aaron. We are delighted to have you.
Wow, that was an amazing introduction. Thank you, Joy. That was very nice. I'm actually, just as a quick point of clarification, I actually am currently at a firm called Harris Sliwoski. So I ended up joining that firm with my team. So I'm part of that firm now.
Wonderful. So making an even bigger impact. And as always, I am joined by my wonderful chairman and CEO, Brian Fitzpatrick, who leads Credible with his wonderful strengths, and excited for him to be kind of facilitating this conversation today with Aaron all about cannabis law and what you need to know. So welcome, Brian. Always excited to have you. Ooh, I think you are muted.
I was muted.
I am muted. Did you do that to me, Joy? Was it?
Please, you have a voice for radio. I wouldn't dare.
I have a face for radio too. That's good.
Agree to disagree.
Aaron, it's great to have you on board, and Joy, always great to work with you on these broadcasts. So, Aaron, if you could give us I mean, Joy gave you a great introduction, but you are a super lawyer. You're doing great and super work here in the cannabis side. And maybe if you can talk a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing in the space for us, it'd be a great way to kick off.
Sure. Well, I started out really at the inception of back when medical marijuana was just kind of something that was being used in activist communities. And it was it had kind of been going on for some time, but in the early 2000s, it started to really gain a foothold in the medical community. And so I kind of ended up advising those groups, and slowly all my outlaws wanted to become businessmen. And so I also kind of pivoted with them and kind of built a firm around that idea of kind of helping these people transition from, growing weed illegally to growing weed legally. And so, and now much of what I do is advising and overseeing several other attorneys that work under me, but I also advise clients individually in Washington, Oregon, and California.
That's great. I mean, I've been out, and obviously we work with a number of different cannabis companies, and it's interesting as I've sort of been traversing different companies. There seems to be like sort of this high influence and need to get the compliance done right in the front end of the process. But then ongoing, I see sort of a mishmash of, adherence and regular sort of controls internally. And it really depends on the company that you're in. And I see some obviously struggling with, with multi-state, differences. So, what are some of your thoughts about some of the biggest things that companies are challenged with from a compliance perspective?
Well, I mean, so first of all, just to start with, the community itself, and much of them having been legacy, growers or legacy people that were there before it was legal, have a natural distrust for authority figures. And so they're not instinctually wanting to follow rules or even be told what to do. So reforming those outlaws and being like, we've got to do this, and this is the reason why, and these are the collateral consequences. And that's part of it. The other part that can be challenging too is that, is trying to, if you see everybody going 90 miles an hour and you're like going 55, you're like, well, what does it matter if I go 70. And it's like, and of course the answer is, well, when you get pulled over for going 70, it won't matter how many people passed you going 90. It'll only matter that you got pulled over going 70. So it's kind of like, it's helping people also kind of understand the costs of the downside costs of not having compliance. And even that can be challenging too, because sometimes the downside cost isn't that much. And so they're doing their own cost benefit analysis. And then I think the other side of especially for the multi-state side of things, what the biggest challenge is, obviously you have this patchwork of laws, right? We don't have anything that's federally legal. So I get to start all my conversations with all my clients of saying everything we do is federally illegal. We are committing RICO as we sit here today. We're taking steps in furtherance of committing federal crimes, and so that's RICO, right? So so everything we're doing is federally legal, and then you have these state laws, and each state law has its own sort of compliance and requirements, whether it's like the type of packaging you use or how many stores you can own, whether you have to be a resident or not. Like that one's a crazy one. I never thought I'd get to talk about the Dormant Commerce Clause, except for when I was in law school. But there's these rules that don't really, you shouldn't be allowed to prevent other people from entering into industries based on their residency. But there's a good policy reason for doing it, which is we don't want a bunch of carpetbaggers from all over the country taking over our industry. We're trying to get all these black market people from this state to quit growing and selling weed. So we want to make it state specific. But and so that's why they do it. And then most states, Washington actually being one of the exceptions, but most states don't do it, or when they do it, they get taken up by the Supreme Court and it gets thrown out. So, but back to the point, which I was almost on, is that, you have these certain requirements, which is like, hey, I've got this big company that's an MSO and I want to bring it to Washington. And it's like, well, you have to have a Washington state resident that's lived here for 6 months. You can only have 3 stores. So there's all these limitations. And then you go to another state in Oregon, maybe, where in one day you're a resident and you can have as many stores as you want. And so that's the diversity of like state to state. There's 2 neighboring states with that much difference. And so that's some of the stuff you deal with.
Well, it's interesting that you were saying that some of these companies were, sort of legacy providers. And, to me, I've always valued good lawyers. And I'm not just saying that because you are one. In running businesses, right? And I don't care what business is, whether it's a cannabis business or a software company, whatever it is, to me, it's like an insurance policy. Good legal work avoids the problems of the future. So in cannabis, we could be looking at fines, fees, penalties, lawsuits, et cetera. But when you look at some of these companies, I mean, they do have a goal to raise money someday.
Yeah.
They do have a goal to sell their businesses someday. And I can tell you, without proper governance and without proper compliance, those become red flags to potential funders and buyers. So even if you're not doing it, for the pure, avoidance of fines, fees, and penalties, because there might not be, and some people say it's better to play the odds and pay the odds. I don't believe that, because if you don't sort of pay and go through the process, you could really set your business up for significant failure, even if you're not worried about those fines, fees, and penalties, because, funding's important, selling your company's important. Maybe one day we have a good IPO market, when things become federally legal. These are all different things I think people have to take into consideration. And I've always been crazy about making sure that we run, clean governance for a lot of those reasons.
Well, those are the first 2 hats that you really want to take off, right? It's like, because everybody, when you're starting up, it's like you're bootstrapping. Maybe some people are fully funded, and hooray for them. But you're always like starting out that your company as a young entrepreneur, and I represent so many of them, and been one myself, right? Like I started my own firm and built one up, and it's like, but yeah, the first 2 hats you want to take off is an attorney and an accountant. And you might have to wear those hats to start with, and you might have to wear them partially even when you have those people in your pocket. But those are, you're your own graphic designer sometimes, you're your own HR guy, you're running all these things. But as you grow and as you scale, yeah, the first 2 roles that really are going to serve you well, I think, are accountants and lawyers. It's just having somebody there that can answer those questions.
Absolutely. So As far as size clients that you're dealing with, are you dealing with mostly multi-state operators, or are you dealing with even smaller companies
Yeah,
as
I
well?
mean, it's really truly all over the place. I've got clients that it's like one guy and it's him doing processing, and then I've got guys that have multi-state operations and multiple stores across the United States, actually. So it's a hodgepodge. What we like to pride ourselves on is we give the same hustle to everybody that comes through the door. So if you're paying our retainer, then we're going to give you the service that you need.
Well, that's great. Well, you have excellent client testimonials, so it's obviously you do what you say. So, talk a little bit about the production side of the cannabis law, and what do you see as sort of some of the unique challenges that that growers and producers are facing today that they really need to be buttoned up on?
I mean, that is literally the toughest industry to go into. I think that retailers, not that they don't have it tough, but when you are looking at growing, even if you're doing an outdoor farm, but especially if you're doing an indoor farm, you have to bring in the kind of power to run those farms, which can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. You have to scale out the building itself. You're trying to control for temperature. You're trying to control for light. You're trying to create all these different atmospheric controls to get this amazing cannabis. But even like I said, even if you're out there in a field and you're growing weed, it's an agricultural. It's just a huge undertaking, and because of that, there's a huge financial upfront cost in order to be successful. And so that means that a lot of the people that are amazing growers have to go find money people, and in money people and farmers don't see things the same way, and they probably shouldn't, right? It's not oil and water, but they look at the world differently. A farmer's going to look at the world differently than a money guy, and so that creates a lot of tension within the community itself or that side of things of production or growing cannabis, I think, and it'll probably remain that way. But I think that's one of the first challenges, is that it takes a tremendous amount of financial resources, a tremendous amount of work, and it costs a lot of money. And then you take all of that and you couple it with the fact that we have this thing that's called 280E, which is a tax liability that they put on cannabis companies that say that you don't get any tax write-offs. So you can't write off your payroll. You can't write off your marketing. There's all these different things that you're not able to write off that I am able to. And so I talked to some of my clients, and their tax rate, the lowest I've ever heard is like around 60%. And most of them, it's like, can be higher than that. And one guy I was on a panel with, he said, our actual tax rate, if we don't fudge anything and we are being 100% honest about what we do and how we do stuff, is like 89%. I was like, well, that's not sustainable, right? There's nobody that's making $1, keeping 9 cents and saying, well, I hope I can keep this thing going. So that's where, it kind of falls back into that compliance thing. It's like where people have to, they're trying to make tough decisions about whether they're going to make payroll or whether they're going to follow the rules.
It's like running a store back in the day. The mob was coming in and taking a vig,
Right. Which is funny, because that's where 280E came from. It was basically to keep mobsters from being able to keep their money. They're like, you have to claim your criminal money, whether you made it or not.
Yeah, but it's funny that, I mean, it's I feel bad for these companies, because here's the IRS with their hand out, like, give me the tax revenue. But it's like, whoop, not so fast. You can't write this stuff off.
It's really scandalous, and it's terrible because every year legislature does take up a bill, and it never gets passed that they're going to do something about this. We do actually have something that's pretty exciting going on with the Schedule 3. And I was a little concerned. I didn't know how the new administration, whether they're going to support it or not, but they have come out and said that they do support moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And part of the reason why we have that 280E thing is because it's Schedule 1. So once it goes down to Schedule 3, there's a pretty strong argument that all these problems will be fixed. Now, the big concern is how long is it going to take for them to do this, and whether it's going to happen. But it looks promising, more promising than anything else we have in the pipeline.
Yeah, I think it's promising. I mean, I think this administration is going to get a lot done, hopefully, in this area. But I think that there's some speculation that with everything on the table right now, that it might not go into effect until 2026, or if it actually officially gets approved. But hey, we'll take it, right? We've been talking about this, a long, long time. If for nothing else other than to just drop back this 280E thing, which is we just talked about, is absolutely crazy. But But I know that everybody, when they're talking about sort of this descheduling or rescheduling, right? I mean, very different things. Because I know that RFK has gone so far as to even saying it should be descheduled, right?
Yeah.
And we'll see if
that would be huge. It would be great.
that would be absolutely huge.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I've talked to so many people, like even on this podcast that we've had talking about this, and I've seen such disparity on whether it's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing. You've got some folks saying, well, if that happens, then, then it's going to become more uh, a bigger burden from a compliance perspective, from a safety, compliance, and legal perspective. And I've seen others say, well, no, if it happens, we get rid of 280E and more, research and, good things happen. So, I mean, I literally, it's almost like I can say it's probably 60-40, 64 and 40 against, from what I've been able to see, because everybody's afraid that this is it's going to start looking like the pharma industry, and we already don't
I've heard
what to do.
Yeah, I've heard people say they think it's the pharma grab. I honestly don't think, you can get the toothpaste back in the tube and be like, okay, well, now all you guys are illegal. It's like, we've been illegal. Like, these are, you have the states collecting pretty big taxes in some states, not all, but several states have a considerable tax income coming from the cannabis industry. And you have actually a substantial cannabis industry here. They're not like, these aren't kids growing weed in their mom's basement. These are people that are like businessmen that have running multi-million-dollar companies. So they're not going to just like go, oh, well, now that we're Schedule 3, I guess you can have everything pharma. It's like, I think that it does create that concern that pharma could be stepping in on it. But I just don't know that they can make us go away that easy. Like, and I could be wrong too, because honestly, like I did look at the numbers. Pharma companies are, when you look at them, like one of those companies, it makes more money than the entire cannabis industry combined. So there are huge companies that and what they do, but I'm still pretty hopeful that we have enough legs that it won't change everything. I think that it'll do the one thing which it should do, which is Schedule 3. I would much rather see it descheduled, but the alternative of nothing is not appeasing at all.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not a tremendous. I mean, look, I think pharma has its place for very serious kind of ailments and things, but I'm a big believer in the medicinal health and wellness purposes of this plant, right? From a CBD perspective, THC perspective, and the different 128 plus other cannabinoids
Right.
that have benefit. And frankly, I've been able to get myself off of pharmaceuticals through these various supplements and just become healthier as a result. So on one level, you hate to see pharma sort of break into it and make everything so crazy expensive, including the entire industry, that it sets back this thing as a potential wellness and supplement kind of power and potential. But on the other side, it has benefits from a quality and safety management as well. I just don't think we can go too overboard on that. So, I don't know. I think the Trump administration is going to work with Congress on what he calls, I've heard him say this, common sense cannabis laws, right? And that would be great to get to some common sense, right? And then I know he's supported, and he said he's going to support safer banking, right? Which is, there's got to be a safe harbor for this safe banking. I've heard all sorts of crazy stories about what people are doing with their cash. I mean,
yeah,
including sending it to another country and turning it to gold and flying it back. So there's lots of stuff going on out there. So, and the other key thing I think it's going to really help is focus on medical research to explore sort of the key benefits of cannabis. The more research we can do, I think, the better. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is because we're not federally legal, we've got this sort of state versus federal challenge, right? It's federally illegal, but each state sort of has a difference in what the legal requirements are there. So, and I know Trump's going to continue to support state level legalization. He's indicated that it'll likely continue a hands-off approach and let the state programs sort of run, even if it's descheduled, right? So he's expressed support for that. But we've got this, mishmash of laws. And if you're talking to somebody who's in 3 or 4 states, it's got to be challenging. How do you help folks sort of navigate that challenging world?
I mean, you kind of like on a person by person, state by state basis, right? Because even in Washington state is an interesting example, but this was going on in several states where you could be driving down the road with your legal cannabis and you hit a state park and you go camping and you bring your legal cannabis to go smoke, and a state park ranger comes and basically writes you a misdemeanor ticket for possession of marijuana. And now you're going to federal court and you're going to end up with a misdemeanor, by the way. They don't really plead them out. And that's forever. You never get that off your record. That's like a permanent record. Like you can't expunge federal crimes from your record like you can other things. Now the federal government can expunge them, but the point of the story is like you're literally driving on one freeway and it's like changes to a federal freeway and you're suddenly illegal. You're engaged in illegal conduct. With the state by state one though, it's also tough too because people will be like, well, I want to go down. I just want to grow my own cannabis. And it's like, well, in Washington, you can't grow your own. Most states have grow your own, but others don't. So we're no matter what, that for sure is going to stay just a patchwork. It's going to change from state to state and place to place and that because each state gets to decide what they want to do. That's why so many people are kind of want federal uniformity. I think that like if I were to look at where you see where people break up on like whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, federal legalization is probably one of the most interesting one to see how many people are like that are in the industry now and they're like, no, we don't want that. That's okay. And part of that has to do with like once you're federally legal, there's federal oversight. And once you're federally legal, you are now dealing with real competition. Like nobody in any of these states is dealing with real competition. The kind of companies that would come into this industry like Philip Morris or Kellogg's or whoever they would compete on levels that are just insane. Plus you'd see consolidation, right? Like what we have right now is a bunch of mom and pop stores, restaurant, like a bunch of mom and pop businesses all over the United States. That gives everybody these smaller little worlds to live in. And they're great. And they support families and putting kids through college. It's just amazing, but it wouldn't look the same if we had federal legalization. So it's a curse and a blessing. And you got to kind of accept it as both.
Well, it's another reason to make sure that your legal house is in order from a compliance perspective, because if there's going to be consolidation, you need to be ready for an acquisition.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get dinged because you have a whole bunch of negative compliance things, because these companies will do due diligence, and
right.
they're going to due diligence you on compliance. They absolutely will.
Oh yeah.
If they're coming in, because one of these big companies that you're talking about, they're not just going to say, "Oh, let's trust them. I'm sure they've done everything right."
Right.
No, they're bringing in a team of folks, including lawyers, to make sure that you've done everything right. So I think it's important to our listeners, if you're running a cannabis business, spend the money on the legal, and work with an attorney like Aaron, where obviously he's dealing business with smaller companies as well as larger companies. So that tells me you're affordable.
Not too affordable, just the right amount.
Not too affordable. It's like if somebody says, "Are you free?" No, I'm never free, but only available. So, so that's good. So what I mean,
like talking about that too, like a lot of the stuff that compliance comes from also is like making things set up in the first place is to avoid litigation. And about 70% of what our firm does is litigation, and it is stupidly expensive. And it is the cost of having a proper things set up in place, having the proper documents, having the proper contracts, so that they're airtight, so the litigation isn't going to be on your exposure side. It's to a factor of like 100 sometimes of how much you could have saved. In other words, you could have spent, $3,000 on having the attorneys draft these agreements and contracts or whatever, but now you're going to spend, $250,000 litigating it because it's a big deal and it's worth that much. And so that's the kind of flip side of it.
Well, as my business partner at Credible likes to say, he said, you might be able to beat the rap, but you won't be able to beat the ride. And the ride's going to be
Right.
expensive.
That's right. That's a good saying. I like that one.
And that's, I've seen that before. I mean, I've had in my many years of entrepreneurship, I've been to court, and thank goodness that I had good legal work done up front, because even though I wasn't able to avoid the stupid litigation, right, that was frivolous, I was able to win the litigation because
Win.
we had everything buttoned up.
Nice.
So it's I just can't stress enough the importance of compliance, and I think that in having a good lawyer, business lawyer, and compliance attorney on your side in this industry. And so this is why we talk about this a lot, because one of the things that our technology does is it brings down the cost of compliance, right? So the things that you have to do procedurally, instead of having a team of people having to do that and take the advice of the lawyers, I'm very much about how do we bring the cost of compliance down through technology. So whether it's filings, whether it's tracking, your marketing, or any of the types of things, many things that have to be done, we can do that in a way that reduces the cost of the implementation of the compliance, because
Right.
you can give the advice, but then they have to follow it and they have to do it.
Right.
So that's the expensive part. So, Aaron, talk a little bit about how folks can reach you and find you and work with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm easy to find. Aaron Pelley. Google me. I'm right there at the top. I'm on LinkedIn. I haven't done a ton of stuff on the other social media platforms in a while, but I exist there. So again, I'm not hard to find, and I'm fairly generous with my time, especially on consults. So if you have a question, you're like, I want to work with this guy or learn more about what he has to offer. Here's my particular situation. I'm very generous with my time and being able to figure out that we're a good fit for each other, because it is an interview, right? Like, you're interviewing me, but I'm also making sure I'm interviewing you, because not all clients are good clients.
Right. Well, that is absolutely true. And I think that, one of the things that I really refer to this is you can be in the firefighting mode as a business, which is extremely expensive, and your business might get burned down, or you can be in the fire prevention mode,
Yeah.
right? So having a good compliance strategy, a good compliance attorney, as well as implementing that strategy, is to me is all about fire prevention. So we've got a lot of things coming up in the future with respect to this new administration. Let's hope and pray that we see something good happening out of the administration, and we can proceed in a very, very positive way. What is your prediction? The last question I want to ask you is, what is your prediction? Do you think it's going to happen in 25, or do you think it's going to go to 26?
I love this question. It was this because I was on a panel as a kid in a young lawyer, and my older mentor, Jeffrey Steinborn, he and I were on a panel, and they said, "Hey, what do you think of the next? What's going to happen with federal legalization? When's it going to happen?" And I said, "Well, I think it's going to happen in the next 5 years." And Jeffrey leaned over to me and he said, "Oh, you're on the 5-year plan." And so I was like, "What?" And so after the panel, I said, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, I've been on the 5-year plan since 1974." So, and by the way, that was in 2011. So I've already missed my prediction once. So one thing I've learned in the last 10 years that I'm terrible at and just don't even engage in, it's trying to predict the future of politics. But I do know also that politics has everything to do with what's going to happen with the future of cannabis.
Well, if you're not good at predictions, you should have been an economist. But
yeah.
But they're occasionally right too, just like the weatherman. So.
Yeah, like broken clocks twice a day.
Well, Aaron, it has been great having you on. I appreciate all the great work you're doing in the industry, and you've been a great guest. And we're gonna check back to see what with you, and as things start to evolve here in 2025. So, thanks for joining us on Credible Live.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.
You as well.